Hello everyone. In this video I'm looking for reasons for bad damage output. Just to get it out of the way. Having bad access to boons like quickness, might, fury or alacrity, or a bad team composition, no banners, no spirits, will obviously negatively affect your DPS. But that's usually outside your control as a DPS player, and in my opinion that should not be called bad damage output. Your damage is bad if you do significantly less damage than other players in your squad. For example, if your alacrity support, who is in the same subgroup than you, is also higher than you. Okay. In this video, I want to highlight a few different reasons why bad damage happens. The most important thing to keep in mind is that while all of the factors mentioned in this video may seem small, 5%, 7%, 10%, together they can add really up to something big. Gear. A surprising number of new raiders do not know how important gear is. Obviously, there's a difference between ascended and exotic gear, about 10% damage for power builds. But do you know what is a 13.5% damage loss? If you have no rune equipped instead of Scholar rune on a power holosmith. And if you don't run buff food and utility, that's minus 7.7%. If you don't have sigils, it's minus 6.5%. If you have the wrong stats in both accessories, you can lose up to 8% damage. So if you combine some of these issues, gear is a very quick and easy way to lose between 10 and 30% of your damage output. Guild Wars 2 players often like to point out how exotic gear is only 10% worse than ascended gear, but that's assuming the exotic gear is 100% correct, including food, utility, sigils and runes. And that's something that is not completely obvious, especially to new players, which then leads to much higher damage losses in practice. I remember a lot of instances where players were asking me about their low DPS, and they said, yeah, I only have exotic gear. But then later I realized it's not just that they only have exotic gear, but like they don't have a sigil of force in their weapon. That's 5% additional damage loss on top, right? So if you have 100% correct exotic gear, that's 10%. But make sure really that you cover all these different aspects like buff food, sigils and utility and runes. Because in my opinion there's no reason to forget about these smaller things, because it's not that expensive to get the correct setup, even if it's just exotic. All the while I'm saying that, you can see me play Power Soul Beast in the background, using my Druid's healer gear. As you can see, I achieve about 20,000 out of the 35,000 DPS that is possible on this class. So even if the gear is extremely wrong, Harrier instead of Berserker, that's still only, in quotes, a 40% damage loss. Keep this in mind while we continue with the next source of damage loss, the golem rotation. The rotational damage difference between a player who has spent like 10 minutes at the golem and has barely practiced at all, and the best players in the world, will only ever be about 25%. 75% of the benchmark is completely free to achieve, as long as you have the exact same setup as the benchmark. I know some people might struggle to achieve this 75% number, so let me say it again. This assumes that your loss in gear is exactly 0.0%, not oh and I missed the sigil, or I didn't take food, or I don't believe in having boons, so I won't apply them from the console. None of that. This number, 75%, is with the literal benchmark settings, including stat infusions, trying to hit the golem in a way that isn't actively trolling, like going AFK for 20 seconds. Under those circumstances, there can be only a 25% damage difference on the golem. In the background you see an attempt at pressing what comes down to random buttons on power soul beasts, which gets me to 78% of the benchmark. To go on a tangent here, keep this footage in mind when you think about choosing a low intensity build as a player who does not have a motorical, physical disability or a mental disability that will cause them to struggle with a higher APM build. So obviously if you can't press buttons faster, it makes a lot of sense to limit yourself to something simple. But I see a lot of players responding to the recent hard stuck low intensity build challenge, saying that they view those builds as great entry point builds, or they like to play them because they feel more effective with them or so. And there might be some merit to parts of this argument in actual raid fights, where we're going to see in the next section also. But for the golem at the very least, it's always true that if you play the good build in a poor way, you will perform better than if you have a perfect performance on a very bad build. Let's make, for example, the ranger builds in the competition had all had less DPS than what I'm showing here, right? So I think the power build was somewhere around 26k. It's a bit unfair with one of pack and leader of the pack, but never mind. And there were the Condi Soul Beast builds were well below that. Like, so I strongly encourage you, if you are less experienced with raiding, less experienced with Guild Wars 2, but if you are capable of playing a higher APM build, make the effort to actually learn a full build. Do not artificially limit yourself to just pressing shortbow 2 on a Condi Soul Beast. And I think that's just something to understand before you decide to play a low intensity build. Understand why you are going to do this. You might have very good reasons to do it, but keep in mind that fundamentally you are capable, you are able to learn something, and even if you're starting out, the meta raid build is really good. Yeah. Okay, moving on from this tangent. Finally, let's talk about raid performance. I'm going to make a separate video on this, and I already have talked about DPS uptime in a previous video. But here's my main point about raid performance. With people losing quite a bit of damage from gear, and some more from the golem rotation, that still won't explain the entirety of the DPS loss. It comes down to how they perform in fights. Mainly there are two questions. Are they continuously attacking the boss? That means if they get a mechanic, do they stop attacking altogether, turn their back away, turn the back to the boss, turn away from the boss, and do mechanic, and then come back, and then resume attacking? Or do they walk backwards facing the boss, keeping up ranged auto attacks at the very least, and then sprint back, and maybe even while sprinting back already continue with their rotation? So does a mechanic mean complete stopping, or does it mean some form of damage output continuing? And the second thing is, if the damage on the class is conditional in some way, are those conditions actually met? A power soul beast, for example, needs to flank the target, and soul beast loses a total of 20% damage if, in addition to not flanking, he also isn't about 90% health, because there's another trait that rewards being at 90% health or higher. So we could just lose, just like that, we could lose 20% of DPS, regardless of our rotational performance, for example. In this cairn clip, I'm doing a serious cairn rotation, and I'm attempting to play it as well as I can, but I'm using druid gear, which is obviously holding me back, as well as the fight being generally hostile to power soul beast, because for example, I can't fully channel my X5 sometimes because I don't want to reflect projectiles. In the end, I reached 12k DPS, which is quite far away from the 20k I could reach on the golem. Now you might ask yourself, how big can this DPS loss be from the fight performance? It can be as big as 100%. If you die or otherwise make very big mistakes that result in yourself going downstate, you're just not going to do damage. So in that sense, raid performance, because its impact can be unlimited, is maybe the most important of the three pillars. But on the other hand, I am a very experienced player on cairn. I know how to play this fight, and my druid gear losing me 40% damage was also a very big contributor, right? I would have done over 20k with proper gear. So you can see you can't neglect any of these three factors. And that brings me to the conclusion. Let's recall the three factors: rotational knowledge, gear, and the actual raid performance. And I think because of the importance of the raid performance, it's wrong to just focus on doing a rotation on the golem. It's certainly just as impactful to have like the right gear to run buff food and sigils and everything. And more impactful than both of these factors is being able to play the raid fight, to be able to meet the conditions that you need from your traits, to be able to continuously attack, to be able to deal with mechanics efficiently. In the end, this also means you have many different ways of improving your damage output. Personally, I make it a point to take every single raid fight I do as an opportunity to learn something more about my class and about the fight. To me, that's the best way to improve. There's always something I could have done better, and personally I never want to blame external circumstances for my own bad damage output. That current fight you saw previously, you can say, okay, 12k, well, you were on fucking healer gear. Yes, but I can also go to the log and check how often I was above 90% health in this fight. It turns out my uptime above 90% health to get access to this 10% modifier from my traits was only about 50%. That means 50% of the fight I was fighting at a huge disadvantage. Now I'm not full health, that means the healer was bad, right? That's like the easy thing to blame. But that's again completely ridiculous, because I can check in the log and see that the other players had quite reasonable uptime above 90% health. I can go to the damage taken statistic and see that it is really just me taking a massive amount of damage. So, do I want to blame the healer? Or my gear? Yes, of course, the gear should be better, right? But I'm not going to be happy with my performance either. Yes, I do only 12k damage, but if I played this better, I could have gotten 13k damage. That's my goal. My goal is to take something from this fight, even if it's most miserable experience, and think about something I could have done better. To me, that's the only real way to improve. Stop blaming other players for your responsibilities in the end. Anyway, with that message I want to leave you. I thank you so much for watching, and we see us next time again.